Hopefully it's recording. So today, I should say Monday, we got into virus basics. I don't know what else to call it. Everything you need to know just about, in general, how viruses hijack cells, integrate themselves, reproduce, all that stuff. Today, and then next week, we start getting into the viruses that cause disease. We are not covering every virus that causes disease because there are so many of them. We're going through kind of the top ones that you may have heard of and that you may encounter, either you have encountered or may encounter in your future careers. So everything we talk about in this PowerPoint, the viruses have DNA as their genetic material. Again, viruses vary a lot in their genetic material. Viruses can have DNA or RNA. They might have double-stranded DNA. They might have single-stranded DNA. If it's an RNA virus, that's next week's lecture. They might have single-stranded, double-stranded. Maybe they have the positive single strand, the negative single strand. There's a lot of variety with genetic material when it comes to viruses. And that's the main way we group them. Kind of like bacteria, we had gram-positives and we had gram-negatives. When we talk about viruses, let's talk about the DNA viruses. Let's talk about the RNA viruses. There are many more RNA virus diseases than there are DNA virus diseases. And so I expect to fully get through this PowerPoint today, even probably with a little bit of time to spare. The RNA viruses requires at least 2 lectures because there's just so many more and they behave unique and different. So out of the DNA viruses, there are 7 families. 6 of them we cover because I fully expect you to see some of these or have already seen and had them yourselves. Again, they're all grouped together based on what kind of DNA they have. Again, whether they have, we can group them based on whether they have an envelope or not. Having an envelope is not a requirement for a virus. Again, if they have them, we call them enveloped viruses. If they don't have an envelope, we call them naked viruses. We also group some of these viruses by size. And then we also start to group them and organize them based on what kind of host cells they like to attack. Now, I'm just going to throw this all up there. So again, we're going through 6 families, my 6 little boxes, and kind of like the bacteria, having kind of like, where are we? How are they grouped? How are they similar? I'm a visual person. So I printed this off so you can just have it in front of you. I'm going to make you guys have to get up if you're not sitting close to the person by you in your row. Sorry. We're going to be starting on the very top left and working our way over to the right. Now, again, all of these viruses have DNA as their genetic material. Did everyone get one? They all have DNA as their genetic material. Our first group, the thing they share in common is they all have double-stranded DNA. We're going to talk about one group that has part double-stranded, part single-stranded during its replication, and then one virus that has single-stranded DNA, which is much more unique. Most DNA is double-stranded. Again, we're going to start at the top left, work our way around. And we're going to start at the top left, the Poxviridae family. Again, it's a double-stranded DNA virus. Size-wise, any virus that's in this Poxviridae family, they are the largest DNA viruses that infect humans. I know there's, I guess, some other ones that we don't care too much about. They're the largest DNA viruses that infect humans. If you've got a really good light microscope like we use for our bacteria, you could see them. Again, you're not going to see any kind of detail. They're still going to look like a little speck of dust next to the bacteria. Most viruses that are in this group are animal pox viruses, that if we are in close contact with those animals, if their animals are similar with some of the same proteins on the cells as us, they can get transmitted to humans, and we'll talk about a couple. The only viruses in the Poxviridae family that's routinely have been known to affect humans is the smallpox virus and the molluscum contagiosum virus that we'll talk about. They're picked up through inhalation, close contact. And anything in this family produces lesions in some sort of stage, whether they go through all 5 stages or all 4 stages or not. They all produce skin lesions. So outwardly, skin lesions, they go through macules. What a macule is just a discoloration of your skin. Like, oh, there's something going on. Usually will lead to some type of papule. Now it becomes a raised portion of your skin. When it starts to fill just with a clear fluid, we call it a vesicle. When it starts to fill with pus, now we have a pustule. All four of those stages are not, depends on the virus, but they do go through outward skin lesions. Two is the smallpox virus, which has another known as variola. Sometimes it's also called orthopox virus. It's got that pox in its name. The virus, although outwardly we can see it producing those skin lesions and developing into the pustules, which will lead permanent scars on the skin, it gets in, that virus infects internal organs. It pretty much destroys them internally, producing a fever of 107 or higher, malaise and delirium, which is probably coming from that extreme fever. Deadly. It travels around in the body once it gets in through the blood, so it doesn't need to get into the lymphatic system. It gets into the blood. Outwardly, it forms those skin lesions, which became the name of pox. Now, fortunately, because it's got a high mortality rate, so a lot of people die. We don't have antivirals to stop it. We're very fortunate we live in today's day and age because we've eradicated smallpox from the world. No one gets smallpox anymore. No one. Any guess how we were able to eradicate it? Yes? A really good vaccine. And enough people got vaccinated. Now, what was nice that made this different than other vaccines, say like COVID, what made it so effective? One, the vaccine was super effective. This virus does not mutate, like COVID keeps changing. This virus doesn't change. Also, there were no asymptomatic carriers. Like COVID, we had people who are like, I feel fine, and they're spreading viruses everywhere. If you had smallpox, you knew you had smallpox, and people you could isolate. So I'm like, there were some things going for this particular virus that allowed us to eradicate it. We've not had a case, if I wrote down the last year. I don't know. I was going to say, we haven't had a case, it's like the late 60s in the United States, that it got to the point that no one has smallpox anymore. Like, no one. This isn't something, oh, if you travel. No one. It's eradicated from the world to the point we've stopped vaccinating. In the United States, we haven't vaccinated since 1972. So my guess is you guys have not been vaccinated. However, if you're working with elderly people, they've been vaccinated for it. Now, the vaccine they used for this was a live attenuated vaccine, which means that virus was still an active virus, but it couldn't cause disease. Because it was still that live virus strain, as alive as a virus can be, when they injected that virus, it would actually cause a pustule right at the infection site. It wasn't spreading, it wasn't causing any allergy, but it did cause that pustule, which caused then a scar. So anyone that's had a smallpox vaccine is going to have a scar right at that infection site. Now, we don't vaccinate anymore. However, there is one group of individuals we do still vaccinate for. Any guess? Because I shouldn't presume that you guys haven't been vaccinated, because maybe. But there's still one group of individuals we vaccinate routinely. Any guess? It's not elderly. We don't care about them anymore. They've already been vaccinated, most likely. The only group of individuals we still vaccinate are military. Any guess why? No, because it's gone from the world. It's a good thought, though, because you think they travel. Like, worst case scenario, even though smallpox doesn't exist anymore, that doesn't mean, say, the CDC and other government health agencies don't have smallpox in some of their labs stored. which means if the wrong people get their hands on it, and no one's been vaccinated. We stopped vaccinating in 1972. I mean, your grandparents are going to live. We're not. We stopped vaccinating. Everyone can die. Everyone can get smallpox again if the wrong people get their hands on it. So we still vaccinate for military, for potential biological warfare, which is why I'm like, I had a student that was vaccinated, I think like that semester that we were talking about this. And he's like, do you want to see my thing? And I'm like, no, because he had just had it, and it forms a really gross little pustule, which will eventually form a scar. Now, the problem is it's still a live attenuated virus, which is why I'm like, no, I don't want to see it, because it's still technically a live strain, even though it can't cause disease. And it's also one of the reasons why they may, well, I'll get to that in a second. I was going to say, because it's starting to come back, the vaccine being given. But we still don't vaccinate for smallpox, unless you're military. Now, the other pox virus that is in the Poxviridae family that does cause human disease, and it's still around, is the mollusca pox virus. It causes a condition known as molluscum contagiosum. Based on its name, it's very contagious. Again, it's in that pox family, so it is going to cause those outward skin lesions. So it develops into smooth, waxy papules. Not the big, ugly pustules like smallpox gets. They do have a waxy look to it, so they do kind of look shiny. And where you generally develop these waxy pustules is anywhere you're itching. That irritates the skin, that's where the virus likes to present itself. Now, it is spread by direct contact. So skin to skin, but that also includes skin to inanimate objects as well. So fomites, meaning if someone had, an outward infection, maybe just on their hand, and they touch something and then you touched that, you can pick up the virus. It can also get spread during sexual contact. The populations that usually are the ones that are going in and getting diagnosed that seem to have the highest number of cases, children because they touch everything and they itch everywhere. Sexually active adolescents, because again, it can get spread during sexual contact. And then AIDS patients, because they really have no immune system to even get rid of the virus. Now, it's not a deadly virus. It's inconvenient. Can be unsightly, because usually these skin lesions are showing up again as anywhere where you're itching and touching a lot, which seem to be the abdomen, the external genitalia, which is interesting all in itself. Apparently that's where everyone's touching, and then your face seems to get it. So it's an inconvenience. It's not going to kill you. You may think you're going to die because it's so gross or whatever. Eventually they will go away on their own, but they can take 3 to 4 months for these to go away. Otherwise, you can go to the doctor, dermatologist, if you can get an appointment, and be like, oh my God, these are gross and unsightly. Please get rid of them. And kind of like warts that we'll talk about today, you can freeze them off. You can cauterize them off. You can laser them off. Otherwise, they'll go away on their own. Now, the other viruses that are in this family, again, most of them are found in animals, and if in close contact with animals similar enough to humans that we share some similar cell receptors, they can cause different diseases. So they can cause different zoonotic diseases, which just means goes from animal to human. They're usually more of a mild infection because, again, we're not the target organism that the virus would like to get in and cause issues. But it's still in the pox family, so it's still going to cause some outward skin lesions. The most commonly known one is cowpox. Edward Jenner was the one that realized that cowpox was similar enough to smallpox that even though they're not the same virus, they're still in the Poxviridae family, which means they do still share some similar genetics. That if you had cowpox, you were actually immune to smallpox. And he's the one that's credited for developing the very first vaccine, that if you could take the skin lesions, which will have that virus in it, because again, it spreads skin to skin with those skin lesions, if you could take some of the fluid that's in the skin lesions of someone that has cowpox, put it into someone else, they would develop antibodies against cowpox, was actually make you immune to smallpox. First vaccine. Now, monkeypox. Again, when I first started teaching, this was like, no one ever heard of monkeypox. It made a big comeback about a year ago. Maybe it's almost 2 years ago now. We have started to see more and more cases of monkeypox. Again, it is a virus found in monkeys. We can get it as humans from close contact with monkeys, but once in us, we can actually still spread it from person to person. Now, a couple of reasons. The main one, though, there's a couple of reasons why we seem to have more cases. One, gotcha, we don't have a lot of interactions with monkeys here in the United States, but other countries do. There's monkeys flying all around. I'm expecting in Costa Rica to have monkeys climbing all over. But if you're in close contact with monkeys, that puts you at an increased risk. So people that are moving out into the jungle areas, moving out into areas in contact with them. But we also realized we're not vaccinating for smallpox anymore. And if we vaccinated for smallpox, you were actually immune to these other animal pox viruses. But now that no one's getting vaccinated for smallpox, you actually have lost your immunity to monkeypox. Now, monkeypox again, we started to have big outbreak about a year ago, year and a half, I don't even remember now. It's been still in my memories. Not too long ago, and I was like, oh, people are getting monkeypox, and everyone's like, oh my God, how are they getting something that's called monkeypox? So to make everyone feel better, we named it Mpox because they felt better about it. Mpox. Now, we don't have a vaccine for monkeypox, but we also know the smallpox vaccine vaccinates against monkeypox. So we actually resurrected the smallpox vaccine. We gave it in a smaller dose, but people that were at high risk knew they had family members, things like that, that had this. We were starting to vaccinate people and resurrecting the smallpox vaccine because the smallpox vaccine targeted monkeypox. And instead of waiting to develop a whole monkeypox vaccine, let's just use what we have already. Now, our next group, when I said today's lecture is all about herpes, it's a large portion of today. Because our next group, this whole box, whole big box, herpes viruses. Now, everyone, when we talk about herpes, you almost always think of herpes 1 or 2 and had no idea that there's also a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. They're named for the order in which we discovered them. But we normally know the other herpes virus is more of the diseases that they cause versus calling them a herpes virus. But there are 8 different human herpes viruses in this family, which is why it's the largest portion of today's lecture. Again, they're all DNA, they all double-stranded DNA. They're the most prevalent of DNA viruses. There are 8 strains that can infect humans, and there's still even some slight variations of each of those. They say about 90% of adults in the United States are affected at some point in their life with a herpes virus. That's a lot. I mean, others will say even higher than that, that there's like no way you could escape your life without getting a herpes virus at some point. And honestly, it's super true. Like, I can guarantee at one point you'll probably experience at least one of these herpes viruses. You just didn't even know it was a herpes virus because you didn't realize that it was in this family. A lot of the viruses in this family can remain latent or dormant, which means they incorporate part of their double-stranded DNA into our double-stranded DNA, and then they just hang out forever. Things will trigger them to reactivate, but that DNA becomes a permanent integration of our cells. Not all of the herpes viruses do that, but a lot of them do. Again, we give them all names. Human herpes virus used to be more commonly known as herpes simplex virus. Now it's just human herpes virus, and we give it numbers 1 through 8. Now, the human herpes viruses 1 and 2 are usually the ones that people think of when they think of herpes. They cause slow-spreading skin lesions. So they're unsightly, people don't like them. Super common. Again, they used to be called herpes simplex virus. 1 and 2 both cause these slow-spreading skin lesions, so I talk about them together. They are genetically different viruses, but they're pretty much outwardly causing the same type of thing. The difference between them, though, is usually where do the lesions occur? The general rule is HHV1 is the above the waist and HHV2 is below the waist. Usually HHV1 is more common, HHV2 is more of the sexually transmitted strain. Now again, where they cause the lesions depends on what kind of infection you have. HHV1 causes a lot of oral infections, more commonly known as cold sores. And again, if you've ever had a cold sore, this virus is in your body. It will never go away. It will go dormant, but then something will trigger it to reactivate, usually stress, which is like the last thing you want when you're already stressed out. It can cause infections and skin lesions around the eyes, then you have an ocular disease. It can cause genital lesions. A whitlow is when it affects the hands and the fingers. And I should note, outward infections, so active cold sores, active whitlow, active infections, that's where the virus is concentrated. That's your infection source. So if you're now touching skin to skin, you're giving someone else that virus. Sharing chapstick, when you have outward lesions, tons of viruses are right there in those lesions, spreading it. So if you are in healthcare and you have active lesions on your hand, you have to have gloves on so that you're not spreading it. This is one, if it is found, if someone has this virus, they have active lesions in their genital tract, specifically in females during birth, infants can pick it up, and it can cause neonatal infections. Herpes gladiatorum, I was gonna say there's one group, I thought I had a picture. No, there's the neonatal, poor kid. Gladiatorum, like there's one sport that seems to spread this particular virus a lot based on its name. And you guess what sport? And it's a lot of skin-to-skin contact. Wrestling. And we'll talk, there's a fungal disease too that they spread a lot of it. But a lot of skin-to-skin contact, again, is if there is an outward lesion, skin-to-skin contact, spreading it. And it just causes outward skin lesions anywhere on the body. Now, again, those active lesions is how it's spread. That's the source of infection. So if someone has an active cold sore, don't kiss them, don't share chapstick with them, because that's where you'd pick it up. That virus has to get into some opening, usually some type of cut, some type of abrasion. Once it gets in the body, it does form what's known as a syncytia. It's not the only virus that does that. Some RNA viruses that we'll get to next week do this as well. It means it causes, when that virus gets inside the cells that are all infected start to fuse together, and they become this large multinucleated cell, which for a virus is great. Now it's almost like you've got this massive complex. Instead of having a little apartment, now you've got an apartment building. You've got lots and lots of room for that virus to reproduce. Now, HHV1 infections primarily are spread by kids. I mean, kids kiss everyone. Oh, give grandma a kiss, and they give their friends kisses, and they touch everything, and they're just not cautious, which means they can be picking it up as a kid, and then it's with them forever. HHV2 infections are primarily, the top spreaders are sexually active adolescents. Now, diagnosing either one of these two usually is just looking at those characteristic skin lesions. They generally don't do any other kind of antibody tests or DNA tests. It's just looking, yeah, it's cold sore. Treatment, we do have some antiviral drugs that treat it, but it doesn't cure it. The idea is that these antiviral drugs stop the virus from reproducing and shedding from the cell. So it's stopping it from kind of slowing down that active infection. But that DNA is incorporated into your DNA and it will be with you for your whole life. So it just stops that outward lesions and makes it go away faster, which means you are less likely to spread it. hopefully you just don't get it, but odds are you will at some point. Gloves, prevention. If you have outward infections, make sure you wear gloves. You're not doing skin-to-skin contact if you can avoid it. Sexual abstinence is really the only way to stop HHV2 infections. Now, human herpes virus 3. Again, most people didn't realize that this one was a human herpes virus because they think of it as more of the diseases that it causes. It is the same virus, but this one virus, known as the varicella zoster virus, causes 2 diseases depending on whether it's the first time you've been exposed to it or if it's reactivated. Same virus, 2 different diseases. It's like your body responds to this virus differently the first time you get it versus later once it reactivates. The first disease is known as varicella. No one ever calls it that, but the first disease is more normally known as chickenpox. So if you've had chickenpox, I've had chickenpox when I was a kid, and I'm like, that means, yeah, I've got this virus in my body right now. I have herpes, because I have human herpes virus 3. I've had chickenpox. This virus is in my body. And yes, the outward thing it usually causes, it's more of a, more children get it than anyone else, but it causes really itchy skin lesions. And that's about it. Maybe a slight fever, kind of tired, achy. I mean, your immune system's trying to fight it off. And it will go away within a week, 2 weeks. Usually about it. Now, if an adult picks up this virus, first time they ever get the virus, it will still present as chickenpox. But unfortunately, as you get older, your immune system gets stronger. Your immune system will have a stronger response, and adults that get this virus and develop chickenpox are usually hospitalized. It causes a very high fever that doesn't want to go away. Your immune system is like super active trying to fight this off, and that super active immune system causes the signs and symptoms. Usually makes it go away. It's never gone. All it does is, it incorporates into our DNA, but it goes dormant. When it becomes reactivated, then it causes a different types of signs and symptoms, so a different disease, still the same virus. The disease is officially known as herpes zoster, because it is a herpes strain, but more people know it as shingles. And this is usually more commonly found in adults than kids. Kids usually are the ones that pick up the virus and develop chickenpox, and then later on in life, the virus reactivates and causes a condition known as shingles. Nope, but we'll talk about that next week, though, because it's an RNA virus. Now, kids, I was going to say, I already kind of mentioned some of this stuff. I'm like, kids are the ones that are usually spreading the initial virus, although we now do have a vaccine to stop it. And if you get vaccinated to prevent chickenpox, if you've never had chickenpox because you were vaccinated, you in theory have also vaccinated against shingles because it's the same virus, all in one. But kids like to spread it. The virus is super infectious. So it's transmitted respiratory droplets, touching the eyes. And I'm like, kids, super close contacts, spreading it, coughing on everyone, touching everything, and causes just those basic irritating, itchy skin lesions. When it becomes reactivated, though, years later, and depending on the individual, depends how many years, years later when it reactivates, it doesn't just cause itchy skin lesions all over the body. It reactivates along a spinal nerve, and I'm going to come back to that picture. It reactivates along a spinal nerve, and in A&P, I think you guys had to know the spinal nerves, you're used to. It reactivates along a spinal nerve. Depending on which spinal nerve, it always seems to pick one, depending on which spinal nerve that it reactivates on, depends on where the outward skin lesion is. So for example, if it reactivates along this spinal nerve, the skin that is controlled by that one spinal nerve, that's where you end up with the skin lesion. And so the skin lesion usually shows up in a line. It's because all the little nerve endings that all originated from that spinal nerve, that's where that virus is reactivating. That's where you get that skin lesion. It's unique. It's not just all over body skin lesion. It's usually a very distinct line on the body. Very painful, itchy, irritating. Now, when I talk about things, I usually seem to get them, but not this time. Just a couple months ago, my husband just got shingles. I was like, most people think, oh, because I'm like, it can't be shingles. We're not that old, right? We're not that old. Because I'm looking, he's like, oh, I've got all these, this rash. And I was like, all right, I'm nosy. I'm like, let me see the rash. And it activated, and I'm like, maybe it's TMI. It activated right kind of at his sacrum and right along his butt. And I was like, that is not a normal rash. It looked very irritating, maybe not quite that red. Very irritating, but in a line, and I still am like, looks like shingles, but there's no way, we're too young. But it was. Stress, I don't know, can reactivate it. You can. Yep, I told him, like, well, did you ask the doctor, should you get vaccinated to prevent it again? He's like, no, I didn't ask. And I'm like, but yeah, you can. And I'm like, if you get it younger, apparently it likes to get reactivate faster, so you're more likely to keep getting it. And I was like, well, good for you that he got it now, because he'll probably get it again. Now, diagnosing it, chickenpox, again, you're usually looking for all the basic, all right, you got itchy red rash, who have you been around? I see you haven't been vaccinated for it. Shingles, again, diagnosing it, that very irritating rash. Because we do have some antivirals that, again, can make it go dormant quicker. And it didn't help him, because without antivirals, you can have that rash that can last for months. Once he started taking antivirals, it went away. It was really not irritating after about a week even. Chickenpox will go away outwardly. It will always be part of your body, though. Shingles, you're managing the symptoms. And again, we do have some antivirals. Now, prevention, I would say, used to be difficult. Not anymore. Used to be difficult because it was so infectious, but it's not that difficult to prevent anymore, because what do we have? We have a very commonly given vaccine. And again, vaccinating for chickenpox, because I know I told you guys weeks ago, most of you are young enough that you've gotten the chickenpox vaccine. And if you've gotten the chickenpox vaccine and your immune system reacted to it, so if you got shingles, either you didn't get the chickenpox vaccine or you're one of those 10% people that it didn't work. I was going to say, so you did have it. Because I was going to say, the chickenpox vaccine is not 100%. Very few vaccines. I don't know if anyone would ever claim a vaccine is 100% effective. Different immune systems react differently. But once we are now starting to vaccinate younger generations against chickenpox, we're expecting to see less and less cases of shingles as the younger generation ages. However, we do have a vaccine for shingles, though. The idea is, even though you've got the virus in your body, it still wakes up antibodies, in your body, so that if that virus reactivates, an excessive number of antibodies can target it faster, so you have less symptoms. Very commonly given vaccine, I'm going to say it was the Zostavax, but I feel like they renamed it Shingrix. Shingrix is the better one. There used to be a Zostavax. Shingrix is 97% effective. That's pretty high for any kind of vaccine, that if it does try to reactivate, your immune system will have enough antibodies to target it and keep it at bay. Herpes virus, that again, no one seems to know till this class that it was a herpes virus, because it's in that family, is the Epstein-Barr virus. A lot of people still don't even know of the Epstein-Barr virus name, but they know the disease that it causes. Now, this virus is highly concentrated in saliva, so that's generally how it spreads. And once it gets into the body through saliva, it gets into the epithelial cells, they'll get into the bloodstream, and the virus eventually tries to target our B cells. Now, our B cells are part of our immune system. Again, when we drew out the whole humoral branch, going to write the whole thing. Those were your B cells. Then you had the cell-mediated branch. We have the T cells. If the B cells are infected, the job of the T cell is to target virus-infected cells. The T cells will start to kill B cells. Because both of these cells are part of the immune system, but one type of cell is killing another type of cell, we call this a civil war. Because these are both cells of the immune system and they're killing each other. because that's the job of what they're supposed to do. So the T cells start to kill the B cells, and when your immune system is now killing its own self, but different types of cells, then you start to have the outward signs and symptoms. Now, in adults, and when I say this usually affects adults, I'm not talking, okay, as soon as you turn 18. When I say adults, we're talking adult immune system. So when you have an adult, advanced, or experienced immune system, a developed immune system, you have an adult immune system. If you're a child, your immune system is still developing. And if you're a child and your immune system isn't great yet, I mean, it's not that it's still working, but it's not working at full capacity yet because you're still a kid and you're still growing and it's still developing. Even though in a kid, your T cells will kill B cells, it's a really weak Civil War, so they usually don't show many symptoms. Sometimes asymptomatic completely or very mild cold type symptoms, which then goes undiagnosed. Again, kids generally don't show outward symptoms. The disease that it causes is known as infectious mononucleosis, more commonly known as what? Shorten it up. Mono. So infectious mononucleosis, more commonly known as mono, also nicknamed the kissing disease, is what we call, is what it causes. Now again, kissing disease because it's highly concentrated in saliva, so that's its main infection source. And then the mononucleosis, because it's targeting immune system cells. It can cause some extreme diseases if you're immunodeficient, meaning if for whatever reason your immune system is off, you don't have enough T cells, it can cause some extreme diseases. As long as you've got a normal immune system, your main outward thing is infectious mononucleosis. So when we're talking about the state of your cellular immunity, when I say a normal immunity, that means, it's fine, but it's not a great immune system yet. It's still developing, say as in kids, versus a vigorous immune system, a well-developed immune system. So kids are usually asymptomatic. They still have the virus, but their Civil War is so weak, it doesn't show as outward signs and symptoms. If you have a very strong, developed immune system, the better the immune system, the stronger the Civil War, the better, the more outward signs and symptoms. If you again have some immune system deficiency, your T cells, you can develop some unique diseases that are very rare, because again, it's very specific for if you have a T cell deficient. It can develop into a cancer known as Burkitt's lymphoma, nasopharyngeal cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it can also develop, it's like a cancer in the mouth, an oral cancer known as oral hairy leukoplakia. And you get these little cancerous growths on the sides of your tongue. It's not really hairy. Because of those extensions on your tongue, they called it hairy. Now, diagnosing it, characteristic signs and symptoms. If anyone's ever had mono, or human herpes virus 4, outward signs and symptoms, tired, fever, swollen lymph nodes, and one of the big things, because it's your Civil War and your spleen is part of your lymphatic system, you have an enlarged spleen. Sore throat as well. A lot of times if you go in, you might think you have a throat culture or that you have strep throat. They'll do a strep throat test, but they can also do a mono test. The exact same company, this box looks familiar, the exact same company that makes that rapid strep test that we do upstairs makes the exact same type of test that can test for mono as well. It's called the mono spot test. Now, because it causes inflammation of the spleen, on the wrong side, the spleen, that spleen can enlarge, and it does become a big concern for patients. Is if you've ever had mono or know anyone that's had mono, one of the big things, because adolescents, they're the ones going around kissing different people all the time. Adolescents are usually the ones that are going in and getting diagnosed all the time. Because it causes such an enlarged spleen, we do have an artery that goes directly to our spleen. And because that spleen can enlarge so much, the problem and issue can become is if you get kicked right in that spleen that is so enlarged, the spleen could rupture. Because you have an artery going to that spleen, if your spleen ruptures and your artery goes directly to your spleen, you will bleed out internally. Which is why, if you get diagnosed with mono, one of the big things, especially in high school, to be like, you cannot play high contact sports for extended period of time. And it's because of that enlarged spleen and the complications that can arise because of it. Even though I taught at high school and I still had students who were like, whatever, I'm going to play anyway. Stupid high school students. Now, treatment, it eventually will go away on its own. You treat symptoms. Oh, you get a sore throat, take some ibuprofen, fever, ibuprofen, you're tired, sleep. I'm like, it's treating the symptoms, and it eventually goes away. If you have some type of cancer caused by it, you may have to undergo some type of cancer type treatment. Otherwise, other conditions, there's really not a whole lot we've got. Your best bet is prevention. If you know someone's not feeling well, don't kiss them. Best way to prevent it. We don't have any vaccine for it. The next human herpes virus is human herpes virus 5. It's known as the cytomegalovirus. Now, why it's called that is because it causes the cells that it infects to enlarge, hence megalo. Cyto means cell, mega means big. So instead of just a normal size cell, it causes the cells to get super, super big and even can cause some dark staining inclusions in those infected cells that when stained, if we actually stain them in a lab, they say they look like owl's eyes. Those are little just dark staining inclusions that happen in infected cells. It's a super common infection. I can't remember if I've got a number, how common. Percent of adults in the United States have this virus. Just looking around, that means half of us have this virus in our body. Why it's so common is it's spread pretty much in any bodily secretion that comes from our body. So it can be spread in saliva, mucus, milk, feces, urine, semen, cervical secretions. If the fluid can come out of our body, this virus can be found in it, which is why it's so common. Luckily, 99.5% of the time, asymptomatic. Again, you had no idea that half of you have this virus in your body because it's usually asymptomatic. Causes no long-lasting complications or issues. But it can, there's that 0.5%. It can cause complications in elderly and immunocompromised. It can cause complications in newborns. Now, some of the complications, again, depends kind of on, what is the status of the individual that has it, where is the infection really concentrating it. So it can cause birth defects. If mom has it and transferred it to baby, it can cause birth defects. It can cause jaundice. It's not the only thing that can cause jaundice in kids, though. It can cause anemia in kids. It's not the only thing that can cause anemia, but it can. In elderly, it can cause pneumonia. Lots of things can cause pneumonia. If it specifically targets the eyes, it's also been known to cause blindness. Again, it's rare that it causes severe complications. But it can. I had one student, God, this is years ago now, 8 years ago or something, that her daughter was diagnosed with this. It was causing neurological issues that at one point they thought it was like shaken baby syndrome. She was being neglected. They weren't feeding the kid. And it was stressing the student out. She's like, I'm a great mom, blah, blah, blah. But it's like this kid has these weird symptoms that are not explainable, by any other thing. And they're like, well, what's going on? The kid's not behaving correctly. I can't remember all the things that this kid was having. Eventually tested positive for this, as half of you might, but it became a complication because it was getting into the nervous system and causing issues. Problem is we don't have a lot of antivirals that can treat it. We have some that can try to kind of treat different symptoms and try to keep it at bay. But it can cause some rare complications. Now, diagnosing it, well, we can take different samples depending on the outward symptoms if you're going in to get diagnosed. And we can look for those in large cells and the dark staining inclusions. We do have different types of DNA tests. They're going to be a lot faster and more accurate, though. Treatment, again, we don't have a lot of treatments. If mom has it and we aren't testing mom routinely and they give it to infants, fetus and newborns can pick it up, could have different types of birth defects. There's really nothing you can do at that point. If it's causing an eye infections, we do have a couple antivirals that can target and help in the eyes. But prevention, again, safe sex, don't share needles, drug use. It's spread into just about every bodily secretion, so it's anything to try to prevent any of those. Other human herpes viruses, I have both 6 and 8 up here. We don't talk about 7. We know it causes issues on the skin, number 7, but we don't know a whole lot about human herpes virus 7 because it's not very common. We know it causes skin lesions, but we don't know much about transmission sequence and any other complications from 7, so I don't have it up here. But human herpes virus 6 causes a condition in infants known as roseola. And it causes a rash, a pink rash, hence the word rose. So thinking of pink roses. It causes a pink rash on the abdomen and torso part of the body that can start to spread out. But it causes mostly just a rash right down the midline of infants. There are indications that there is a link from this particular virus to causing MS or multiple sclerosis. There seems to be a higher case of those that have developed multiple sclerosis and then have previously had this virus. Possible. They're seeing a correlation, whether it's enough to definitively say this virus causes that, because there are people that get MS that haven't had this virus, but it could be a cause. Otherwise, no long-lasting complications that we know of. The rash goes away. Kids get lots of rashes. This is one of them. The other human herpes virus 8 only causes issues in those that have no working immune system, okay, those that are in, say, the age stage of HIV infection. And it causes a cancer of the blood vessels. As again, when we talked about viruses can cause cancers, this is one of them. Again, you have to have no immune system working. But it causes Kaposi sarcoma, cancer of the blood vessels, bursting blood vessels on your skin. We visually see them outwardly. Now, away from the herpes. So many herpes. And on to our Papillomaviridae group. Again, still double-stranded DNA, still in our little blue boxes. What this particular virus causes are papillomas, which are more commonly known as warts. Now, a wart is a benign growth of epithelial tissue. What does benign mean? And there's 2 types of cancers, benign and malignant. If you had to have a cancer, which one would you want? Benign, because what does that mean? It's not spreading. So it means it's causing a growth of the epithelial tissues, but it's not spreading. So in one little area, that virus causes the epithelial cells to grow kind of uncontrolled, and you get your unsightly growth, your wart, but it's not spreading. But you usually end up with more than one wart because the virus is activating in different places. So you can get warts pretty much anywhere in the body. There are lots of strains of papillomaviruses. It's not just like one papillomavirus does everything. There are lots of strains of papillomaviruses. They generally do not cause cancers, but some strains can. Generally, if you get a wart, that doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. It just means you got an unsightly wart. But there are a few strains that can. Some of the strains that cause genital warts will cause you to have an increased risk of various types of cancers. It's transmitted primarily skin-to-skin contact or skin to inanimate objects, so skin to fomite. One of the common warts, plantar's warts, which means these are warts on the bottom of your feet. This comes, a lot of kids get them. My youngest daughter, I love her. But she gets them a lot. And I have no doubt it's, kids share shoes. Let me try your shoes on. And I'm like, kids can get them. And again, if you had a wart, that virus is on a shoe, someone else puts the shoe on, picks up that virus, and there we go. It keeps that virus transmission sequence going. A lot of these viruses can also spread via what's known as auto-inoculation. Auto means self, because if you have an automatic car, it shifts by itself, which means it's a self-inoculation. If you have a wart on your hand and you start touching that wart onto other skin surfaces, you're inoculating that virus into other parts of your body. So you can be spreading it to others, but you can be spreading it to different parts of your body as well. Again, you can get warts anywhere. They can be painful depending on where they are. They can be super large, small, unsightly. They're not great. Diagnosing it is almost always based on observation. You can see them. If they're internally in females, it may require a pap smear to view them. Treatment, we can remove the warts, and there's lots of ways to remove it. There are chemicals that can remove it. You can freeze them off. You can cauterize them off, aka burn them off. There are some laser treatments you can use to get them off. If they cause cancer, again, it's rare, but if they do cause cancer, well, your treatment, you're going to have some type of cancer treatment. Prevention is difficult because a lot of people pick up this virus. They didn't know where they got it from, always touching inanimate objects. Things to try to prevent some of them. Abstinence, mutual monogamy is going to stop some of the spread of some of the viruses. But we do have a vaccine against some strains. The HPV vaccine stands for what? Guessing you know the H. Human. Human papilloma. The human papilloma vaccine, or human papilloma. I don't think they put the virus in there. Vaccine. Again, it prevents against some strains of papilloma viruses. Specifically, it's targeting the strains of viruses that are causing a lot of the genital warts, which, hey, why would you want those? But it's a lot of those strains that also put you at a much higher increased risk of developing some of the cancers that come from them. Your normal strains that say cause plantar warts, benign. Those are not ones that cause cancers, but some of the papilloma viruses do put you at an increased risk. And luckily, we now are developing vaccines against some strains of viruses that are preventing some cancers. Our last group, our double-stranded DNA, is the adenoviridae group. And this is one that probably all of you have had an experience with because it is one of the viruses that causes the common cold. It's not the only one. We're going to talk a whole lot more about ones next week that cause the common cold. There's so many viruses that can cause the common cold, so many. But it's one of the DNA viruses that causes the common colds. It's spread by respiratory droplets. So one of the outward symptoms of the common cold is coughing, and it's the infectious spread. That's how it's spread then, is those respiratory droplets. Usually causes respiratory infections, and so you've got coughing, possibly a sore throat. Again, it's your basic cold type symptoms. Some of the strains, there are lots of strains of adenoviruses. Some of them can cause and infect intestinal tract issues, which means you're like, I got a common cold, but I also got a little touch of diarrhea with it too. It can also get into the conjunctiva of the eye, and it can cause pink eye. Now, there's a difference in pink eyes. Again, pink eye just means you have pink eyes. There are two things that can cause it. Bacteria, different strains, Viruses, different strains, like lots of different things can cause pink eyes. How do you know if you have a bacterial pink eye versus a viral pink eye? Any guess? I'm going to save you guys money if you've got kids that get pink eye, because I did this. Because first, if you have a bacterial pink eye, how would you treat it? Antibiotic. If you have a viral pink eye, how would you treat it? Let it play out. There's nothing you can do. Any guess? How would you know if it's bacterial versus viral pink eye? It is an outward symptom of the pink eye. If anyone's had pink eye before. Bacterial pink eye is all the crusty, gunky stuff. So if your kid has pink eye and it's gross and goopy and whatever, bacterial pink eye. Take them in. I mean, it will go away on its own. It's not like, people died of pink eye. It'll go away on its own, but antibiotics will make it go away a whole lot faster so they can get back to daycare or wherever. Viral pink eye. Pink eyes, no goopiness. It generally means, and if you take your kid into the doctor and be like, they've got pink eye, because they can't go to daycare then. They've got pink eye, and the doctor's like, yep, it's not gunky. So I'm like, it's viral. They have a cold. It will go away on its own. You still can't take them. But they'll charge you like $200 for it. You could try some different types of drops. If the drops will make it go away, it's irritated. Otherwise, this is not going to go away. They usually have other signs and symptoms of a cold with it. But otherwise, I'm like, I don't know. It just won't ever go away. You could go in and test them, but still, either way, if it's irritated, you can treat them hopefully for whatever's irritating it. This, they just have a common cold that just has to run its course. Which usually means a longer period of time without taking them to daycare. Now,
In fact, you can't wear your contacts when you have pink eye. It makes your pink eye 10 times worse.
oh, I bet it's, your eyes are irritated.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got it literally the first month I started working at my daycare.
If you're wearing contacts and it's a bacterial, it's going to irritate it, viral or bacterial. But if it's bacterial and you're treating, you're killing the bacteria, but sometimes if the bacteria end up on the contacts, and you're like, I kill all the bacteria, but then you put the contact back in, you just kind of keep reinfecting your eye as well. Now, there again are lots of strains of adenoviruses. They are one of the viruses that can cause the common cold as well as other irritating, annoying things. We do have a vaccine against some strains that's usually given for military personnel when they go active duty. Again, if they're active duty, we want them actually actively doing something, not sitting in their barracks because they have an annoying cold or they've got some diarrhea or they've got pink eye, even if it's just viral pink eye. So we do have a vaccine that's given for active military because, again, they're in close quarters, possibly spreading it, and we want them active. It's not a very long-lasting vaccine, which is why it's not commonly given. And again, there's lots of things that can cause the common cold, not just adenoviruses. Now, moving on, we just have two more groups. It's our part double-stranded DNA, part single-stranded DNA. In its replication, it's got a little bit of both, which is unique. And it's a hepadnaviridae. Anything that has hepat or hepad deals with which part of the body? The liver. So this is one of the hepatitis. And in my note, there is a hepatitis A, B, C, D, and E that we will talk about. So there's hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, hepatitis D, and a hepatitis E. Out of all the hepatitises that we'll talk about, the only one that has DNA is hepatitis B, which is kind of helpful to kind of narrow it down. All right. It would be nice if it would have been hepatitis D, D for DNA. It's not. But hepatitis B is the only DNA hepatitis. It means the other ones are all RNA, which is the next PowerPoint. Now, the word hepatitis just means inflammation of the liver. That's what it means. And there's lots of things that can cause hepatitis. The 5 hepatitis viruses can cause hepatitis. But other things can cause hepatitis. Again, it's inflammation of the liver. Certain types of medicines can cause inflammation of the liver. Drug use, alcohol use There's lots of different types of foods that can even irritate the liver. Lots of things can cause hepatitis in its generic word. But we're going to talk about the viruses that can cause hepatitis. Now, symptoms. You're going to have one of the outward things, jaundice. Now, some people's skin, if they're super tan, darker skin, or even have more in yellowish tint, sometimes it's hard to see if someone has a yellowish tinge to them till you look at the whites of their eyes. They also turn jaundice. I mean, that's pretty extreme. But looking at the whites of the eyes is one easy way to tell if jaundice is occurring. It's not the only symptom, though. One of the big things, if you have liver inflammation, your liver is a huge organ in your abdomen, and if it becomes inflamed, it's going to be very sore. So you're going to have it's going to be a pain, abdominal pain, specifically in that right upper quadrant. Now, those are your main symptoms. Again, if you're you have a viral infection, you still might also suffer all your normal immune system responses. Fever, fatigue, body aches, tired. Your immune system's at work. If you also have hepatitis D, which is an RNA virus that I talk about next week, but if you also have hepatitis D, the two together is like a big double whammy. That can actually cause permanent liver damage, which could require a liver transplant. Hepatitis B in itself generally is not that bad, but the two together cause some significant damage to the liver. How it's spread. So we can find this particular virus, the little virion, in saliva, in semen, in vaginal secretions, as well as, it's pretty much in every bodily fluid. The top bodily fluid that I don't have listed up there, though, is blood. So blood transfusions, shared needles. Because the number of viruses per milliliter or microliter is highest in blood, blood is the most infectious source. Other fluids can still carry the virus, other fluids can still be infectious, but blood usually is the big infectious source. Now, for a lot of people that pick it up, asymptomatic. Maybe your immune system gets rid of it. Maybe you're just like, oh, I feel really tired today, and that was like it, and you didn't even realize. You could be asymptomatic, very mild symptoms that you wouldn't even go in and get diagnosed. If it causes enough liver damage, it could develop into liver cancer later on in your life. Anytime you have inflammation anywhere, that can start to damage cells. It can start to damage DNA. And it does put you at an increased risk for cancers of those areas later on. Doesn't mean it's imminent, but it puts you at a higher risk for someone that didn't have hepatitis B. Children can pick it up as well during childbirth. If mom has hepatitis B, infants can pick it up. It is another thing that could cause jaundice in infants. Luckily for us, it's preventable. We do have a hepatitis B vaccine series, which has decreased our number of cases. Otherwise, if a patient comes in exhibiting all the hepatitis symptoms, that pain in the abdomen, to diagnose it, they're going to look for the antigens of the virus. So they're going to do some type of immune system test, looking for the antigens. Treatment is almost always supportive. I'm like, let's treat the symptoms. We don't have a universal treatment for hepatitis B. We've got a couple antivirals that seem to make the symptoms less, but otherwise we're waiting for the immune system to get rid of it. Best bet is just to not pick it up in the first place. Keep up with your vaccines. Otherwise, abstinence can slow the spread, monogamy, universal precautions. That's why we have all those, wearing gloves, gowns, face masks if you think there's going to be any type of splashing, is preventing that fluid transmission. And then our last virus is the only one in this group that affects humans. It's single-stranded DNA, which is unique all in itself. It's a parvoviridae, and And I should know, there are lots of parvoviruses that affect animals. Even your pets could have a parvovirus, not transmitted to humans. So I'm like, we don't share enough characteristics. There's only one that affects humans. And no, the Parvoviridae, it's unique, single-stranded DNA. It's also very small for viruses. But the virus that infects humans is known as the B19 virus. Couldn't tell you why they called it the B19. What it causes, it's a minor infection. What it causes, it's known as erythema infectiosum. Eryther means red. That's why your erythrocytes are your red blood cells. It causes your skin, primarily in your cheeks, to turn very, very red. It was also nicknamed the fifth disease because back before we had WebMD and we had anything where doctors could look stuff up online, pediatricians had lists of, well, these are the top causes of childhood rashes, and this was number 5 on things that can cause rashes in children. But this primarily hits the cheeks. So it also has another nickname that you're not supposed to say. It's politically correct, but it's also called the slapped cheek syndrome because the cheeks themselves just get so red. Sunlight will aggravate it. Again, it's still a viral infection. It may also still have some fever, fatigue that goes along with it, but outwardly it's generally just very bright pink rashes, primarily in children. It's pretty rare that adults seem to suffer from this, whether our immune system is able to clear it before it shows any symptoms, primarily just causes those bright pink cheeks in infants. Goes away on its own, no long-lasting effects.